In August 1985, he assumed supreme power himself and corrected some of the human rights violations of the Buhari regime. Nigeria is a volatile society which paradoxically produces self-effacing and sometimes humble heads of state. Yet being at the top is a high-risk job. Nigeria has had 9 leaders since independence in 1960. 3 were killed, 2 are in prison, and 1 in exile. In general, under the soldiers, Nigeria tilts towards dictatorship. Under the politicians, Nigeria leans towards anarchy. But in all the pendulum swings of power, no one has as yet managed to crush Nigeria's abiding spirit and sense of theater. Even in the toughest days of the Buhari administration, Nigerians never lost the capacity to laugh at themselves and at their rulers. General Buhari, then head of state, at a play in his honor entitled The Roadblock. Security forces as well as the traveling public were ridiculed and satirized mercilessly.
Open your back by force!
Okay, sir.
Even repressive rulers had long learned to allow for political comedy.
Okay? Huh? This is not making number. Waiting. This is not artificial breast.
I say such you might talk of artificial breast. Look, I jam it. You don't enter trouble.
The message of this play remains clear.
What driver?
If the security forces make a mess of the job, they had better go back to the barracks. Boredom in the barracks encourages coups. The Nigerian Staff College has been involved in hatching some of them.
Timing is important, and you've got to, if you're going to succeed in any sort of complicated plan of war, as we're about to discuss, you've got to have a sense of timing.
The barracks and the military college have replaced the colonial prison as the university for future leaders. The colonial jail produced men like Nkrumah of Ghana and Kaunda of Zambia. Today, the faces of future presidents are more likely to be found among military officers at an African staff college.
This lecture today is really particularly for officers of your own type and of your own caliber who are going to be faced with decisions on defense policies, decisions relating to the national policy, and therefore you need to be clearly aware of our geopolitical setting. Decisions taken at the core of the world economy would affect us whether we like such decisions or not. And therefore it is extremely important for us to really have a very clear perspective.
Okay, we've all listened to the problem. Now, what is the answer?
Lieutenant Colonel Moses Effiong was an instructor at the Staff College. Since we filmed him, he has been jailed for life for attempting a coup. Lieutenant Colonel Mike Iyoshi was another instructor.
From where I'm staying.
Mohammed, is that correct?
The Nigerian army attracts some of the best brains in the land.
If you follow, whether it runs from right to left or left to right, really doesn't matter. You can see the ridge, right?
Yes, sir.
But exactly whereabout is the farm?
The farmland.
Iyoshi was seen as one of Nigeria's most brilliant up-and-coming officers.
Just about.
Yes,
Mohammed is just about right.
In December 1985, he also was arrested and accused of being one of the coup leaders. The charge against him included treason, a capital offense.
I used to hear this phrase, they hit them up for 6.
Hit them in for 6.
Yeah,
Absolutely
that's
right.
Montgomery's favorite phrase. I didn't get to know what the hell it was until I went to Camberley and
And what is it?
I saw it. It's North African campaign. It's the famous cricket.
The cricket.
Yeah.
When you take it away,
hit the
you
half
hit
for
a
6.
man right out of the ground. You hit him
Yes,
for 6.
and I saw the phrase. I said, gosh, so that is what it's all about.
In March 1986, Iyoshi was executed. When the military hold power in an Islamic society, as in Sudan, plotting against the regime occurs less often. It's partly because a shared religion provides a sense of community. Jafar Nimeri ruled Sudan for 16 years after seizing power in 1969. He survived despite changing his ideological colors many times. But Sudan has an Achilles heel, the North-South divide. Since independence, there's been unrelenting conflict between Muslim North and the non-Muslim South. Twice it's erupted into civil war. The Northerners have a large and costly army, but still couldn't control the South's bid for secession. The first war lasted 17 years and was estimated to have taken 500,000 lives. 1 million more fled their homes. A peace was patched up in 1972, but after a decade of uneasy truce, the army is back, fighting again. The issue this time is different. Both sides accept the principle of one Sudan. The question is who should run it and how it should be governed. National unity is as remote as ever. The wounds that were first opened in the far-off colonial days continue to bleed. From Khartoum, the capital, the British pursued their contradictory policy. Territorially, they wanted North and South to be united into one country. Culturally and religiously, Britain wanted the two parts to remain separate, to curb the spread of Islam and of Arab influence. The British kept Southerners insulated from Muslim Northerners, but encouraged Christian missionaries to come in instead. A kind of North-South apartheid was created, separate homelands. The consequences for Sudanese stability are still being felt. Under Nimeri's military government, Sudan did maintain a veneer of democracy. A People's Assembly was established with civilian and military members. It was bilingual, Arabic for the north, English for the convenience of southerners.
The question of an unsettled issue of who is the custodian of the Arab interests. Which country? Where is the locus of the Arab interests? Is it in Egypt? Is it in Saudi Arabia? Is it in Libya? Is it in Syria? Is it in Iraq? Is it in Lebanon?
The issue of whether Sudan belongs to the Arab world or to Black Africa was a regular subject of debate. Whether the discussion had any effect on the military government's policies is another matter.
We in the Sudan, as Sudanese, and we have to underline this because this is very crucial and important in my opinion, we should look on the foreign policy away from the traditional concept that foreign policy is being practiced on neighborhood basis.
When African soldiers capture power, they claim that they are here to restore discipline. When civilians return, they claim they are here to restore dialogue. A parliamentary system of this kind is a compromise between those two ambitions. But in addition, it's a safety valve. You see, Sudan is the only country in Africa where a military government was actually overthrown by civilians. Way back in 1964, they haven't forgotten. Don't push civilians too far, give them a safety valve. History repeated itself in 1985. Civilians had again had enough of tyranny. Not even President Nimeri's opportunistic establishment of the Islamic State could stave off the anger of the masses. To avert a popular revolution, the army removed Nimeri from office. The military promised to hold elections and did so within a year. The great-grandson of the legendary Muslim leader who fought the British in the 19th century is Sadiq al-Mahdi. In 1986, he became Sudan's new prime minister. This Oxford-educated politician is himself a bridge between Islam and modernity. He leads a coalition government in a multi-party parliament. Of the Mahdi state.
Exactly. And therefore we can say that this very much looks like a...
But while Islam is a unifying factor among northern people, it is still a threat to north-south cohesion. Sudan continues to suffer the trauma of being two nations within one state.
Hello? You better shut up when I'm talking, okay? Hello, listen.
Ghanaian leader, Flight Lieutenant Jerry Rawlings.
All planters, do you have corn? I'm talking about planters, not diggers. Let me see you by the hand, up. Good. Now, those of you who has the corn sacks, go and supply. But you've got corn in your left hand. Jesus Christ. Okay. Now, those of you with the sacks better watch out and feed us, okay? Now, where is he? You take over.
Under Rawlings, Ghana has rediscovered a sense of direction. He is pursuing a policy of socialism, but the slogans are often more militant than the practice.
And the line is not straight. Move.
The country does need strong leadership. One urgent goal is to re-establish respect for farming. Another is to improve efficiency on the land.
The point is, as they dig the holes, you, the planters, put the seeds in their holes. All right? Every digger, make sure you've got a plant.
Rawlings' high-profile politics include setting a public example in the fields and encouraging the masses to cooperate in self-help.
It is only by collective effort that the nation's problems can be solved. There are still some people who would like the nation to go back to childhood. Such a person was the man from the Osu People's Defense Committee, most unfortunate, who got up to speak at the budget debate at Parliament House recently, and who said that everything was fine when the white man was here. And so we should bring him back to help us. This man, and others who think like him, longs for the dependency of childhood. But we are grown up, or should be. We're supposed to be old enough to realize that the nation is now paying the rest of the outstanding bill for those easier days, when so many of our resources were squandered.
Although Rawlings is a military man, he is more concerned with mobilizing for development than for war. His concept of economic conscription is an attempt to enlist more and more citizens into the process of production and social transformation. But Ghana's economy is fragile. The IMF has helped with loans, but ordinary workers still haven't seen much benefit. Political stability remains elusive, and Rawlings' own position is far from secure. To safeguard both his and the country's future, the Rawlings rhetoric now speaks of mobilizing both hoe and gun.
The right to defend your freedom is a must. Sure. Yes, and the means of having to do so is something you will have to acquire. Oh no. It's a long way off. We've lost a lot of time in having to democratize violence. She means only being why you here later. Oh no. Okay. Right from America to China to Russia. I'm a more fair, more like 10-year-old children can be. It's the democratization of violence. Oh no. Whoever took control of the bullets, guns, was obviously going to dominate you. Yes. And that's the way it's been. That's the way it is in the third world.
The military's monopoly of the gun must be broken if the people are to prevail. Ironically, many Americans would agree with Radical Rawlings that the people have a democratic right to bear arms. Whether that results in stability is another question.
The right to defend, your freedom. To enable Koni soldier to get used to the idea, okay, that civilian also has the right, to hold the weapon. First, you have to inculcate the idea into his head. And it's not an easy thing to do.
The wind of change blowing through the Belgian Congo, and down comes the Belgian flag in Leopoldville, a few days, in fact, in advance of independence. Elected as Prime Minister of the new Congo Republic, Mr. Patrice Lumumba receives congratulations from members of both houses of Parliament.
They caught him on his way to Stanleyville and flew him back. Patrice Lumumba securely wrote.
No story illustrated the fragility of Africa's political foundations more than the Congo, now Zaire. The Belgians had done nothing to prepare their huge colony for independence. Within weeks, Prime Minister Lumumba was ousted. The army had mutinied and later seized the deposed Prime Minister.
His recapture was quite a triumph for Colonel Mobutu, who now saw his enemy arise. Lumumba's bonds are tightened. They were taking no chances. And his wife and child watch his humiliation. The whole affair, of course, serves to underline once again...
Lumumba was taken to the rebel province of Katanga, which had seceded under Western prompting. He was soon murdered. The first phase of the Mobutu regime had begun.
for Mobutu's troops, they yelled and danced with joy. They had won a great victory. They had got Lumumba after trying to lay their hands on him for months.
The strong arm tactics of President Mobutu Sese Seko Ngwendu wa Zabanga have produced one of the most durable regimes in post-colonial Africa, in place for over 20 years. Behind the acclaim of his one-party zealots is the grim record of plots, repression, rebellion, and internal war. Thousands of Zairians are in exile. The West is more interested in his minerals than his politics and has kept the subsidies going.
Bandundu Oyo. J'ai tout de suite retrouvé l'ambiance habituelle de l'accueil que les militantes et militants ont l'habitude de me réserver et croyez-moi, j'en ai été très ému. Quant à ma candidature, que vous venez de retenir pour la prochaine élection présidentielle, je mesure, vous le deveniez bien, l'ampleur et toute la dimension de la tâche que j'ai à assumer.
Mobutu is one of Africa's great survivors, but the survival of a leader should not be confused with the political stability of a country. In Zaire, order and a sense of community are as elusive as ever. In societies where political institutions are weak, political personalities loom large. The office holder is more important than the office. In Kenya, for 15 years, Jomo Kenyatta was the very personification of the state. Two credentials converged to qualify Kenyatta as the founder president: martyrdom and the respect for elders. For a decade, Kenyatta had been imprisoned by the British. His advanced years commanded reverence as Mzee, the old man, but deference soon developed into a personality cult. By 1978, it had already become a serious offense to speculate about the president dying. His mortality was a subject which was taboo. There were understandable political reasons for this. Kenyatta had become a symbol of stability. Many felt he had also to become a symbol of personal durability. His own immortality would have been a way of saying the nation shall never die. Here was a young nation being ruled by a very old man. The nation was fragile because it was young. The ruler was frail because he was old. The two needed each other for reassurance, for at least the appearance of immortality. Nothing illustrated Kenya's political fragility more than the assassination of Kenyatta's most famous minister, Tom Mboya, in 1969. Riots broke out in Nairobi and in Mboya's home region. Mboya was a Luo, Kenyatta was a Kikuyu. The Luo thought the murder was a Kikuyu conspiracy. The clash between Kenya's two biggest ethnic groups threatened large-scale political disorder. Yet the new nation and the aging ruler continued to need each other a little longer, and Kenyatta's residual prestige was still used as a substitute for strong institutions. Upon Kenyatta's death, power passed peacefully to his vice president, Daniel Arap Moi. Like Vice President Lyndon Johnson when he succeeded the charismatic John Kennedy, Moi was initially at a disadvantage, inheriting the mantle of a political giant. But Moi decided Kenya needed continuity above all.
Salvation Army, 500. Wanashekuku, 2,000.
With his slogan of Nyayo, footprints, Moi carried on Kenyatta's policies of self-reliance and private enterprise under the banner of a one-party state. Footprints in the sands of capitalism. The question remains as to whether those sands are a secure foundation for national stability.
Kitu kimoja ndugu zangu kinanipa tabu. Nigere shahada ya kizungu kuluwani mwinamira igere. Uene bunzala bubule batongi bani. Lakini mapanga nupoza.
Next door in Tanzania, a praise singer honors the nation building of President Julius Nyerere.